The restaurant was not too fancy, but it had a warm feeling that made people stay longer than they planned. Soft music played in the background, and the lights were dim enough to feel calm, but bright enough to see every expression clearly. It was a kind of place where people came to talk, to think, or sometimes to fix things that had already started to break. She sat at a table near the window, her fingers wrapped around a glass she hadn't touched in several minutes. Across from her sat the man she once thought she would spend her life with. Now, just sitting across from him felt heavy. He leaned back in his chair like he owned the moment. There was a small smile on his face, but it wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile that made people feel small without saying a word. "So this is how it ends," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You walk away and think you'll do better?" She didn't respond right away. She had prepared herself for this conversation, but somehow, sitting here, everything felt different, harder. "I didn't come here to argue," she said quietly. He laughed under his breath. "You didn't come to argue, but you came to prove something, right? That you're fine without me." She looked down for a moment, trying to stay calm. This was exactly what she had expected. He always turned things into a game where he had to win. "I came to close this chapter," she said. "That's all." But he wasn't listening. Or maybe he was, and just didn't care. "You'll regret it," he added, leaning forward now. "People like you always do. You think you can just start over? It doesn't work like that." His words were quiet, but they carried weight, the kind that slowly builds pressure in your chest. A few tables away, a different kind of scene was playing out. A man sat with his young daughter, carefully cutting her food into smaller pieces. He spoke to her gently, making small jokes that made her smile. She giggled at something he said, and he laughed with her, not too loudly, just enough to make her feel heard. He looked like any other parent. Simple shirt, no expensive watch, no need to stand out. But there was something steady about him. Calm, like nothing could rush him. Every now and then, he glanced around, just to make sure everything was okay. Not in a suspicious way, just in a protective one. Back at the window table, things were getting worse. "You really think you can do better than me?" the man said, his voice slightly louder now. "Be honest." She took a deep breath. People nearby were starting to notice. "This isn't about better or worse," she said. "It's about peace." He shook his head, almost amused. "Peace? That's just another way of saying you gave up." That word hit her harder than she expected. She had tried for so long, stayed longer than she should have, ignored things she shouldn't have ignored. And now, somehow, she was the one being blamed for leaving. She felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let tears come out. Not here, not in front of him. Then he leaned in slightly and said something that changed everything. "You'll come back," he whispered. "You always do." That was the moment she realized something clearly. If she stayed sitting here, even for one more minute, she would lose something inside herself. Without thinking too much, she stood up. Her chair made a soft sound as it moved back. The man looked surprised for a second, but then his expression turned curious. "Where you going?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and looked around the room. Her eyes moved quickly, almost searching for something she didn't fully understand yet. And then she saw him, the single father sitting with his daughter. He had just finished helping her, and she was now playing quietly with something on the table. He looked relaxed, unaware that someone was about to step into his evening unexpectedly. She hesitated for a second. This was crazy, but staying where she was felt worse. So she walked. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she didn't stop until she reached his table. He looked up as she approached, slightly confused but calm. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "I know this is strange." He waited, giving her space to speak. Then she leaned in just a little and said something that surprised even herself. "Will you dance with me? My ex is watching." There was a brief silence. He blinked once, clearly not expecting that. From across the room, the ex straightened in his chair, trying to understand what was happening. The father glanced at his daughter. She looked back at him with innocent curiosity, then gave a small smile like she trusted whatever he decided. He looked back at the woman standing in front of him. There was no arrogance in her request. No game. just a quiet kind of desperation mixed with courage. He stood up. "All right," he said simply. "No questions. No conditions. Just a calm yes." They walked together toward the small, open space near the music. It wasn't even a proper dance floor, just an area where a few couples sometimes stood when the music felt right. As they stepped into that space, the music seemed to soften, or maybe everything else just faded away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he gently placed his hand in a respectful way, careful not to make her uncomfortable. She followed his lead. At first, her movements were stiff. Her mind was still back at the table, still hearing those words. But slowly, something began to change. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "Just breathe." His voice was calm, steady. It helped. She let out a small breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." "You don't need to explain," he replied. "Sometimes people just need a moment." That simple sentence made her chest feel lighter. Across the room, her ex watched, his expression tightening. At first, he tried to smile like it didn't matter. But as the seconds passed, that smile disappeared. Because something had shifted. She wasn't sitting there anymore, trying to defend herself. She was standing, moving, choosing something different. Back on the small dance floor, her steps became more natural. Not perfect, but real. "You seem calm," she said after a moment. "I try to be," he answered. "It helps my daughter." She glanced toward the table. The little girl was watching them with quiet interest, completely at ease. "You're a good father," she said without thinking. He gave a small smile. "I just try to show up every day." There was no pride in his voice, just honesty, and somehow that felt rare. The music continued, soft and steady. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could breathe without pressure. No judgment, no expectations, just a simple moment between two strangers. And sometimes, that's all a person needs to remember who they are. When the song began to slow, she realized something else. She wasn't dancing for her ex anymore. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just there, and that changed everything. As the music came to an end, they naturally slowed to a stop. She stepped back slightly, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have no idea what that meant." He nodded once. "Take care of yourself." No extra words. No attempt to continue the moment. Just quiet respect. She turned back toward her table. But something was different now. Her steps were steady. Her shoulders were no longer tense. And when she reached her ex again, she didn't feel small anymore. Not even a little. Because sometimes it only takes one unexpected moment to remind you that you're stronger than you think. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, the soft music blending with the low hum of conversation. But for her, the world felt different. The brief dance with the single father had stirred something she didn't fully understand yet. It wasn't excitement or thrill. It was a quiet kind of comfort. The feeling that she wasn't alone in facing whatever the evening had thrown at her. She walked back to her table, where her ex sat with that same smug expression. But this time, she didn't feel intimidated. She noticed a slight twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked to the open space where she had just danced. Something had unsettled him, though she wasn't sure what. Her hands rested lightly on the table, and she met his gaze without flinching. "I'm done trying to prove anything to you," she said softly but firmly. There was no anger in her voice, just a calm resolve. The words felt heavier than any argument she could have thrown at him, because they weren't meant to hurt him. They were meant to remind her of herself. He leaned back, clearly annoyed that his usual control wasn't working. "You think walking away and dancing with someone else changes anything?" he asked. His voice was low, but there was a sharp edge that betrayed his frustration. "It changes everything for me," she replied. She didn't wait for him to respond. Instead, she let the moment hang, heavy and quiet, before picking up her glass again. She took a small sip, the cool liquid calming her nerves. Meanwhile, across the room, the single father returned to his own table, his daughter chattering happily beside him. He acted as if nothing had happened, but a small smile tugged at his lips. The brief dance had been unexpected, Yes, but there was something simple and kind in helping someone without expecting anything in return. He looked at his daughter, who was now drawing little shapes on a napkin, and gently guided her hand when she struggled to make a perfect circle. His attention was entirely on her, yet there was a quiet awareness in the way he moved, a sense that he saw and understood the subtle tensions of the world around him without being consumed by them. The woman watched from across the room. She didn't approach him again yet, but she noticed the way he interacted with his daughter, the patience, the quiet encouragement, the way he made her feel safe. It struck her deeply. She realized she had been missing that kind of calm in her life, always surrounded by noise, pressure, and judgment. Her ex noticed her staring and followed her gaze. "Who is he?" he asked, his tone laced with mock curiosity. "Some guy you're going to run off with?" She shook her head slightly, almost smiling at his inability to understand. "No, he's just someone who knows how to treat a person with respect," she said quietly. It wasn't meant as a jab, though he surely heard it as one. The ex scoffed. "Respect? That's easy to say. It doesn't mean anything." She didn't argue. She had learned that arguments with him never led anywhere. Instead, she focused on the man across the room, noticing small things. How he laughed softly at his daughter's little jokes, how he adjusted the chair she was sitting on without making it obvious, how he seemed completely grounded in the moment. It was ordinary, but it was extraordinary in its own quiet way. Curiosity overcame her hesitation. She found herself walking again toward his table, this time without the urgency of the earlier dance. She wanted to understand, to observe, to see what made someone so ordinary feel so rare. As she approached, the father looked up, surprised but welcoming. "Hello," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "Hi," she replied, trying to find the right words. "I just want to say thank you again for earlier." He nodded lightly. "No problem. Sometimes people need a little help to stand on their own feet. I just happened to be there." She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "You make it look easy," she said. "The way you handle everything, your daughter, it's impressive." He chuckled softly. "It's not always easy, but you learn to focus on what matters most. That usually makes things simpler." She considered his words. There was a quiet wisdom in them that contrasted sharply with the chaos of her own life. She realized she had been chasing recognition, approval, and validation for so long that she had forgotten what it meant to feel genuinely safe and understood. Meanwhile, her ex had noticed her movement and frowned, clearly annoyed that she wasn't paying attention to him. He tried to interject. "Don't talk to him. But she ignored him. For once, she wasn't reacting to his need to control the conversation. She was choosing her own perspective. The father noticed the tension in her eyes and offered a reassuring smile. "You don't need to explain anything," he said. "Some things are just moments. They don't need reasons." That sentence lingered. She realized how long it had been since anyone had said something like that to her, without a hidden meaning, without judgment, without expectation. They talked quietly, sharing nothing heavy, nothing personal at first. It was simple conversation, comments about the music, the food, the small details around them. Yet every word felt meaningful. There was a sense of connection that didn't require explanations or performances. She found herself laughing softly at one of his jokes, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a small release of tension she didn't realize she was holding. Across the restaurant, the ex watched, his face growing red with frustration. He tried to speak, tried to regain control, but every attempt failed. She wasn't listening. She wasn't reacting. She was simply existing in the moment, and it made him powerless. The woman noticed that for the first time, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because someone had given her something, but because she had allowed herself to accept it. Acceptance. Simple, quiet, yet profoundly healing. As they continued talking, she observed him closely, the small details of his kindness, the way he didn't need to prove anything, the way he treated life with a quiet patience. It was foreign to her, but comforting. She realized she had been chasing people who demanded constant proof of her worth, and now she was standing with someone who didn't. He noticed her studying him and smiled faintly. "I know it seems unusual," he said, Most people think you have to show off to be noticed, but really, you just need to be present. She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. For once, there were no games, no hidden motives, just a simple understanding of what mattered. The evening slowly moved forward. Plates were cleared, the music continued, and the restaurant's atmosphere remained calm. Yet, for her, everything had changed. She realized she didn't need to fight, argue, or prove herself to anyone anymore. Not to her ex, not to strangers, not even to herself. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life where interactions were this simple. A life where kindness was quiet, where respect was given freely, where moments like these could exist without explanation. The father noticed a reflection in the window, a small but significant change in her expression. There was relief, gratitude, and a spark of curiosity. A spark that hadn't been there before. "You're thinking too much," he said gently, noticing her gaze. "I guess I am," she admitted, smiling slightly. "Sometimes thinking too much makes things heavier than they need to be," he replied. "It helps to just be." She realized he was right. She had spent so much time analyzing, judging, and fearing that she had forgotten what it meant to simply experience a moment without expectation. The conversation drifted toward lighter topics: music, her favorite dessert, small stories about his daughter that made him laugh quietly. It was mundane, but it felt real. It felt honest. Her ex, finally realizing he had lost his influence over her for the evening, slumped slightly in his chair. He no longer tried to pull her back into argument. His presence had lost its weight. She looked back at the single father one last time before returning to her table. There was something grounding about him, something steady that reminded her of the strength found in simplicity, the power in quiet confidence, and the beauty of moments that don't demand validation. The rest of the evening passed without incident. She finished her meal, her mind lighter than it had been in months. Her ex tried to speak once or twice, but she no longer heard the words. They had lost their meaning. As she left the restaurant later, she glanced back at the man and his daughter. They were walking together, his hand holding hers, her small fingers curled around his in a natural, protective way. She smiled softly, understanding something essential. Strength isn't always loud. Power isn't always visible. And sometimes the people who seem ordinary carry the kind of presence that can quietly change everything. The single father had done nothing extraordinary, and yet he had given her something she hadn't realized she needed. A reminder that calm, quiet, and kindness could still exist in the world. She stepped into the night with her shoulders lighter and her mind clearer. For the first time that evening, she felt like she had seen what it meant to stand tall without trying, to exist without proving, and to experience life without fear. And in that moment, she knew that everything had shifted, not because of a dramatic confrontation or a bold gesture, but because she had allowed herself to embrace the simple truth. Sometimes, the right people appear exactly when you need them most, and all they ask is that you notice them. Her ex remained behind, slouched in his chair, realizing too late that his control had never truly mattered. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The evening had already shown her a new kind of clarity, one that no words, no arguments, and no past mistakes could undo. For the first time in a long time, she walked away feeling lighter, stronger, and quietly empowered. And she knew that she had glimpsed something rare, the calm confidence of a man who needed nothing to prove and yet inspired everything. The next day, she couldn't stop thinking about the man from the restaurant, the memory of the dance, the calm in his presence, the way he treated his daughter. It all lingered in her mind like a soft echo she couldn't shake. She kept replaying the scene, noticing details she hadn't before. The gentle way he held her hand, the small smiles they shared, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate without effort. It wasn't just a dance. It was everything about him. She walked through the city streets, her thoughts tangled between curiosity and disbelief. How could someone so ordinary-looking carry such extraordinary calm? How could someone so grounded appear so unbothered by the world, while still commanding attention in the smallest, quietest ways? Her mind kept returning to the same conclusion. She had met someone remarkable, without even realizing it at first. Meanwhile, the single father and his daughter were continuing their routine, unaware of the ripple they had created. He dropped his daughter off at school, and went about his day like any other man who carried responsibilities on his shoulders. Simple coffee at the corner cafe, a quick stop at the grocery store, a friendly nod to barista who knew his order by heart. Life for him was practical, organized, and lived without the unnecessary need for recognition. Yet, somehow, that same quiet presence left an impression on those who crossed his path. She decided, after much hesitation, that she would go back to the restaurant later in the week. Not to dance again, not to make a statement, but to understand more about him. She wanted to see if the calm and respect she felt the night before was genuine or just a fleeting moment. That evening, she arrived at the restaurant earlier than she had the first time. The lights were softer now, casting a warm glow across the tables. She noticed him immediately, sitting with his daughter in a corner, quietly talking while she drew little sketches. The sight brought a smile to her face. There was nothing staged or forced about them. Everything about the scene was real, ordinary, and yet captivating in its simplicity. She waited for a moment, unsure if approaching him again was proper. But before she could decide, a restaurant staff member approached him and greeted him with unusual familiarity. "Good evening, sir. Your usual table for tonight." He nodded politely, thanking the staff member. The tone in the conversation caught her attention. It was respectful, attentive, yet not overly formal. She realized that he seemed to carry some quiet influence in his presence, even without drawing attention to it. People treated him differently, not because he demanded it, but because they instinctively respected him. Her curiosity grew. She could feel it. Something was different about him, something her eyes hadn't fully seen yet. She didn't want to make assumptions, but she couldn't ignore the subtle cues that suggested he was not an ordinary man. Her ex appeared again in her thoughts. She remembered the look on his face during the dance, how his confidence had faltered. He had tried to belittle the man, to assert his dominance, and failed. For the first time, she felt something shift inside herself, an understanding that strength didn't always shout, and that arrogance didn't equal power. As she observed, she noticed a few staff members discreetly glancing his way, a slight nod here and there. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic. Just small acknowledgments that suggested they knew something others didn't. It intrigued her more. She decided to approach. This time, she walked slowly, deliberately, not in a hurry or out of desperation. She arrived at his table, and he looked up, meeting her gaze calmly. "Good evening," she said, her voice lighter than before. "I hope it's not strange seeing me again." He smiled faintly. "Not at all. Please sit." She took a chair nearby, careful not to intrude. I just want to say, yesterday meant more than I realized. Not because of what happened with my ex, but because you made it feel simple. You made it feel safe." He considered her words carefully, then nodded. Sometimes, people forget that safety doesn't need to be complicated. It's not about who has the loudest voice or the most influence. It's about presence and care. She nodded, feeling the weight of the truth in that statement. She realized that she had been living in a world full of noise, constant demands, and pressures to prove herself. She had been so focused on appearances, recognition, and validation that she had forgotten how it felt to simply exist and be acknowledged without conditions. For the next few minutes, they talked lightly, sharing stories about everyday life. He spoke gently of his daughter's school projects, her little victories and frustrations, and the ways he tried to teach her about patience and kindness. His words were simple, unassuming, yet carried an authenticity she found magnetic. "You make it sound easy," she said after a pause. "How do you stay so calm? How do you make it feel effortless?" He chuckled softly. "It's not effortless. It's just that I focus on what matters. The rest, I let go." She thought about her own life, the arguments with her ex, the constant worry about judgment, the endless comparisons to others. She realized she'd been carrying weight that wasn't hers to bear. And watching him, she understood that life could be lighter if she focused on what truly mattered. Meanwhile, the subtle tension from the night before had not completely dissipated. Her ex had learned indirectly that the man she had danced with carried something she couldn't immediately see. A few subtle messages had made their way back to him. He had no idea of the full story, but he sensed that this man was not like anyone he had ever underestimated. The woman noticed the glances from the staff, subtle and respectful, and a sense of curiosity began to mix with her fascination. There was a quiet power here, something grounded, something natural. She felt drawn to understand more, not for selfish reasons, but to comprehend the presence of someone who could be both ordinary in appearance and extraordinary in character. Hours passed. She stayed long enough to observe the way he handled small interactions, the way he smiled at the waitstaff, encouraged his daughter, and managed his calm even when little interruptions occurred. There was a consistency in him that felt rare. A real person, not someone performing for attention. Before leaving, she gathered her courage. I have to ask, how do people know you? How do they seem to respect you like that? He smiled lightly, as if he had anticipated the question. Some things are not visible at first. People notice consistency, honesty, and care more than anything else. That's all I can say. She nodded, feeling both satisfied and intrigued. She realized she had glimpsed something larger than herself. A quiet power that didn't need announcement, a confidence that didn't need display. Something she had been searching for, without even knowing. As she walked out into the night, she reflected on the experience. She had come to understand that appearances could be deceiving, that the people who seem ordinary might carry wisdom and strength beyond measure, that respect could be earned silently, without ceremony or fanfare. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that she had met someone who existed beyond ordinary measures of success, someone who made her realize that life could be simpler, richer, and more grounded if one allowed themselves to see it clearly. Her mind wandered back to the previous night, the dance, the fleeting connection, the quiet respect, and now she saw in a larger context. It wasn't just about a single moment. It was about understanding the character of someone who could influence the world without demanding it, someone who could inspire trust and calm simply by being present. The evening's experience left her with more questions than answers, but for the first time, she welcomed them. She didn't need to have all the answers yet. She only needed to notice, observe, and appreciate the rare presence she had encountered. And somewhere in the quiet streets, she understood something essential. Real strength doesn't shout. True confidence doesn't demand attention. And the kind of influence that shapes people quietly is often invisible until you're close enough to feel it. She walked home slowly, savoring the night air, carrying a sense of curiosity and admiration she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had glimpsed a man who existed beyond the ordinary, a man who had the power to change the way she thought about people, life, and the subtle beauty of quiet presence. By the time she reached her apartment, the feeling had settled deep inside her chest, not as a rush, not as a fleeting attraction, but as a lasting impression, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who seem ordinary at first glance. And she realized, finally, that what she had witnessed was more than a single encounter. It was a lesson in patience, quiet confidence, and human connection, something she had longed for without knowing she needed it so desperately. She lay awake that night, thinking about him, thinking about the way he carried himself, the way he treated life and his daughter, and the quiet respect he inspired without even trying. It was a revelation that left her both humbled and inspired. She didn't yet know how this story would continue. She didn't yet know what role he would play in her life. But she knew one thing for certain. The world contained people who could change you not with words or actions, but simply by existing authentically and allowing others to witness it. And in that realization, she finally felt ready to let go of her past, her ex, and all the noise that had clouded her judgment. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. Free to notice, to experience, and to allow life to unfold in ways that she had never expected but now quietly hoped for. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. It was a few days later when she found herself back at the same restaurant, the memory of their dance still lingering like a quiet echo she couldn't shake. She told herself she was only coming to enjoy a meal, nothing more. But as soon as she walked in, her eyes found him sitting with his daughter, laughing softly at something she had said. It was the same calm, grounded presence, and it drew her attention instantly. This time, she noticed more. The way staff approached him, not just politely, but with a subtle deference that wasn't overt, yet couldn't be ignored. The way he moved with confidence, yet without arrogance. She had felt the change in herself the night of their dance, and now she was curious to see if it was just a fleeting moment or part of who he truly was. She walked to a nearby table, careful not to appear intrusive, but close enough to observe. She noticed a manager subtly nodding at him as he passed by, greeting him in a way that suggested respect beyond casual politeness. And then it hit her. This man wasn't ordinary. There was something more, something hidden beneath the quiet demeanor and ordinary appearance. She remembered her ex, the smirk on his face, his constant need to assert control. He had clearly underestimated the single father, treating him as someone insignificant. And yet, in those few moments, it had become obvious that he was wrong. The way people responded to him, the respect, the attention, the subtle acknowledgement, told a story her eyes hadn't fully realized until now. Curiosity pulled her forward, and she found herself standing near his table. He looked up, pleasantly surprised but calm, as if seeing her again was a simple matter, not something extraordinary. "Hi," she said softly, unsure what else to say. I just wanted to ask you something." "Of course," he replied, his voice gentle and steady. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then asked, "People, they treat you differently, don't they? I mean, I noticed it before, but now I can't stop wondering why." He smiled faintly, acknowledging her observation, without being defensive. Some things aren't obvious at first. People notice consistency, honesty, and reliability. Those qualities draw respect naturally. That's all I can say. She frowned slightly, trying to piece it together. There was more to him. She could feel it. Something hidden. Something that people who worked around him instinctively recognized. He didn't need to announce it, and yet it was impossible to miss for those who paid attention. Her thoughts drifted to the night of the dance. He hadn't needed to display wealth or status to command attention. He hadn't bragged or tried to impress anyone. And yet, there was an influence in his presence that couldn't be ignored. It was subtle, quiet, but undeniable. A staff member approached, greeting him with formal respect, and she realized that even small interactions carried an unspoken acknowledgement. It was clear that the people around him were aware of something significant, something he didn't advertise. She couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "Are you important?" she asked, unsure how else to phrase it. "I mean, in ways that people notice without words?" He laughed softly, shaking his head. "It's not about importance in the usual sense. I suppose some people might consider me influential, yes, but it's never about showing off. It's about doing things quietly, consistently, and letting others see the results without making a fuss." Her mind raced. Influential, respected, quiet power, and all this wrapped in a simple, unassuming man. It was a combination she had never encountered before. She had assumed he was like any other father, ordinary in every sense. Now, she realized that assumption had been completely wrong. You're a billionaire, aren't you?" she asked cautiously, feeling slightly guilty for putting it into words. He looked at her calmly, as if expecting the question sooner or later. "Yes," he said simply, "but it's never been something I feel the need to announce. It doesn't change how I live my life or how I treat people." The revelation hit her like a wave. The man she had seen as ordinary, the quiet, steady, kind father, was someone whose influence extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. And yet, he didn't act differently. He hadn't tried to impress, hadn't tried to gain favor. Everything about him had remained genuine. She thought about her ex and how differently he had treated him, assuming that he was just another ordinary man. The contrast was stark. One man carried wealth, power, and influence quietly, without needing to assert it. The other flaunted arrogance, seeking control and validation at every turn. Her heart felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she had witnessed authenticity in action. He had shown her that true strength didn't need to be loud. He didn't demand recognition. And heavier because she realized how many people in her life had failed to measure up to that quiet integrity. The father noticed her silence and gave a gentle smile. "I don't use what I have to change anyone's opinion or to make anyone feel small. That's never been my goal. The only thing that matters is treating people with respect and consistency, and the rest is just life unfolding as it should." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she could articulate. She realized that wealth and status were meaningless without humility, kindness, and presence, and he had all those qualities without ever needing to announce them. For the first time, she felt a deep admiration, not for his money, not for his influence, but for the way he lived his life, the way he interacted with his daughter, the way he treated others, the quiet confidence that came from knowing who he was without needing validation. Her ex had been wrong in every possible way. The man she had danced with wasn't someone to be belittled or underestimated. He carried a presence that commanded respect effortlessly, without arrogance, without spectacle. And in that moment, she understood the stark difference between genuine power and the empty pride of those who had none. The restaurant seemed quieter now, or perhaps it was just her own perception. She watched the interactions between him and his daughter. The care, the patience, the small lessons woven into ordinary moments. It was simple yet profound, and she realized that this kind of presence could leave a mark far deeper than any wealth or status ever could. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak. She simply observed, taking in the details she had missed before. The slight nods from staff, the casual respect from people who recognized his achievements without needing explanation, the gentle humor he shared with his daughter. Every small action spoke volumes about his character. Her mind returned to the dance, the moment of quiet connection that had seemed ordinary at first. Now it felt entirely different. She had glimpsed a man who lived with integrity, whose calm presence could shift the energy around him without effort, whose influence was both quiet and undeniable. She realized she had underestimated the world around her, assuming appearances told the whole story. But here was proof that true power could be hidden, carried with grace, and expressed through care rather than words. Before leaving, she approached him one last time. I had no idea, she said softly, her voice a mix of awe and respect. You're incredible. He smiled gently, as if he had expected this reaction. I'm not incredible, he said. I just try to be consistent and kind. That's all anyone can do. She nodded, understanding the humility behind his words. It wasn't about recognition, influence, or appearances. It was about living authentically, treating others with respect, and allowing life to unfold naturally. As she left the restaurant, she felt a quiet shift within herself. The admiration she felt was not about envy, not about desire, but about recognition. Recognition of something rare, genuine, and profoundly human. She knew her ex would never understand. He measured people by appearances, by control, by power he could assert. He would never grasp the subtle strength she had witnessed. But she did, and that knowledge left her feeling stronger, lighter, and more aware of the kind of people she wanted in her life. People like him, quietly confident, grounded, kind, and authentic. People who didn't need to prove themselves because their presence already spoke for them. The night air was cool as she walked away. She thought about the lessons she had learned. True power doesn't demand attention. Wealth doesn't define character and presence. Real, genuine presence can change lives quietly but profoundly. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the encounter had already shifted something inside her. Not her desire for wealth, not her need for approval, but her understanding of what truly mattered. She had met someone extraordinary, not through grand gestures or loud displays, but through quiet confidence, humility, and kindness. And in witnessing that, she felt a rare sense of clarity, a sense that life could be simpler, richer, and more meaningful when measured by the quality of presence, not the noise of status or ego. For the first time, she understood something essential. The people who leave the deepest impact in your life are often the ones who seem ordinary until you truly notice them. And now she had noticed. She hadn't planned to see him again so soon, but life has a way of surprising people when they least expect it. A week after the revelation at the restaurant, she found herself walking down the same street, carrying a sense of curiosity and quiet anticipation. She didn't know why she felt drawn to see him again, only that something inside told her it was worth taking the chance. The restaurant looked the same from the outside, familiar and warm. Inside, she spotted him immediately, sitting with his daughter, helping her with some homework she had brought along. The simple scene made her smile. There was no pretense, no effort to impress anyone. Yet the quiet attention he gave his daughter spoke volumes. It was calm, steady, and reassuring. She walked in and paused, observing him for a moment. He looked up, and met her gaze, a subtle smile on his lips. It wasn't surprise or expectation. It was recognition, calm and easy. "Hi," she said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," he replied, his voice warm and steady. "Have a seat." She took a chair at a nearby table, careful not to disrupt their space. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day," she admitted, "about how you live your life, how you treat people, and how calm you are even when so much seems to demand attention." He nodded, listening intently. "Life has a way of testing patience and character," he said. "I've learned it's easier to focus on what matters and let the rest take care of itself. You can't control everything, and try to impress everyone just takes energy you don't need to give." She considered that for a moment. He made it sound so simple, yet she knew it wasn't. There was discipline, consistency, and quiet confidence behind every action. She had seen it not just in how he treated her, but in the way he interacted with his daughter, with the staff, and even with strangers. "You make it seem effortless," she said softly, "but I can tell it's not. How do you manage it?" He smiled faintly. "It's not about managing it. It's about understanding what's worth your energy and what's not. Some things are worth worrying about, but most aren't. Focus on what matters most, people you care about, things that have meaning, and the rest, just let it pass." She realized she had spent so much of her life trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to impress people who would never appreciate it. Here was someone who didn't need to prove himself, yet commanded respect quietly, and it was all natural. Her ex had crossed her mind a few times over the past week. She remembered his smug confidence, his need to dominate every interaction. Compared to the man sitting across from her now, her ex seemed small and constrained by his ego. The contrast was almost painful to recall, but also enlightening. "You're extraordinary," she said quietly, almost whispering. "Not because of wealth, not because of status, but because of the way you exist in the world. It's rare to see someone so genuine and consistent." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm not extraordinary," he said. "I'm just myself. And I've learned that being yourself consistently is more valuable than pretending to be someone else. People notice that over time, even if they don't always say it." She smiled, feeling a warm spread through her chest. It wasn't just admiration or curiosity anymore. It was understanding. For the first time, she realized that she had been searching for a presence like his without even knowing it. She had wanted stability, kindness, and quiet strength. And here it was, embodied in someone she had initially thought was just a simple stranger. Across the room, she noticed subtle signs of respect from staff and other patrons. It wasn't obvious, but she could feel in the way they approached him, spoke to him, and acknowledged him quietly. He didn't command attention, yet it was given freely because of the way he carried himself. She realized then that influence could exist without being loud or demanding. Her attention returned to him as he helped his daughter, patiently correcting a small mistake she had made in her homework. The way he guided her without pressure, without harshness, without showing off knowledge or authority, spoke volumes about his character. She understood why people respected him. He didn't need to announce it. It was visible in every simple action. "I think that's what struck me most," she said. "Not the dance, not even knowing you're a billionaire, but the way you treat life and people. The patience, the calm, the honesty, that's rare." He nodded, acknowledging her words with humility. Patience and honesty are simple in theory, but they take effort in practice. Life tests them constantly. You can't always succeed perfectly, but you can try consistently, and that's what matters. She thought about her own life, the arguments, the pressures, the constant chase for validation. Compared to the simplicity of his approach, her struggles seemed heavy and exhausting, and she realized she had a choice. Continue to carry the unnecessary weight, or start learning from examples like his. They spoke for hours, but not in a rushed or forced way. It was calm, easy conversation, where each word mattered not because of drama or performance, but because of honesty and understanding. She shared small stories about her life, and he listened, genuinely engaged, offering quiet advice when appropriate, but never judgment. She noticed how his daughter interacted with him, trusting, secure, happy. She realized that his calmness wasn't just an image he projected. It was a lifestyle, a consistent way of being that influenced everyone around him positively. And that realization filled her with a mix of admiration and inspiration. At one point, she hesitated, then asked a question that had been forming in her mind for days. Does it ever feel lonely? Being so grounded, so consistent, sometimes I think people don't recognize it fully. He considered her question carefully. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've learned that what matters isn't recognition. It's knowing that you're living with integrity and care. People will notice eventually, and the ones who matter, the ones who truly see you, will appreciate it more than anyone else ever could. She nodded, understanding the depth of that truth. Recognition for the sake of recognition was empty. True impact, true respect came from consistency, care, and quiet confidence. And he had all of it. The night drew on, and she realized she'd been changed by these encounters. Not by wealth or status, but by witnessing authenticity. She had been reminded of something fundamental. The people who inspire the most aren't always those who shout the loudest. They are those who live quietly, honestly, and consistently, and allow their actions to speak for themselves. As they prepared to leave, she felt a sense of gratitude she couldn't fully explain. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Not just the other night, but for showing me a different way to see people, life, and even myself." He gave a small, gentle smile. Sometimes, all we need is to notice. And sometimes, noticing quietly changes everything. Take care of yourself. Live honestly. That's all anyone can do. She walked out into the night air, her chest light, her mind clear. She realized that the encounters, the conversations, and even the simple moments she had shared with him had left a lasting impression. They weren't dramatic or flashy, but they were meaningful in a way that touched her deeply. Her thoughts returned briefly to her ex, and she felt no anger, no need for confrontation. His control had never mattered, and she finally understood that completely. The strength she admired now was quiet, grounded, and genuine. It didn't need to be proved, and that realization gave her peace. As she walked home, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Presence is more powerful than appearances, kindness more enduring than wealth, and quiet confidence more inspiring than arrogance. People who live authentically can influence the world around them without effort, and noticing them is sometimes all it takes to shift your own perspective. She thought about the father and his daughter, the calm in their interactions, the respect they inspire without seeking it, and the genuine care that defined every movement. She realized she had witnessed a rare combination: humility, strength, kindness, and consistency. And that combination had changed how she saw life. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about him not as a stranger or a curiosity, but as a quiet example of what life could be when lived authentically. She felt inspired, not by the wealth he carried, but by the integrity, patience, and presence he exhibited effortlessly. For the first time in years, she felt truly free from judgment, expectation, and the need to prove herself. She had learned to recognize what truly mattered, and she had been reminded that some of the most extraordinary people are those who appear ordinary at first glance. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of clarity and gratitude. The encounters had shown her a truth she wouldn't forget. Life's deepest impact often comes not from dramatic gestures, but from quiet presence, honesty, and care. And with that understanding, she drifted into sleep, carrying the lessons with her. The dance, the conversations, the subtle signs of respect, the quiet confidence. It was all more than experience. It was a reminder of what it truly means to live with authenticity, kindness, and calm strength. She knew that her life had shifted quietly, profoundly, and forever. She would carry that change forward, seeing the world differently, noticing the extraordinary in the ordinary, and valuing presence above all else. And somewhere in the quiet night, the single father and his daughter continued their lives, unaware how deeply their ordinary, honest, and kind existence had touched hers, and would continue to inspire her for years to come.